Montana Territory, December 1869. The unforgiving Montana winter had settled over Whitehorn like a heavy blanket. Frost sparkled on every window pane of the small frontier town, while smoke curled from chimneys into the vast blue sky. Yancey Pratt pulled his worn leather gloves tighter and adjusted his hat against the biting wind. At 25, he'd spent nearly 7 years riding the range, but winter always reminded him that the frontier was no place for the weak or the lonely. He'd buried that thought deep alongside memories of his family back east. Out here, a man survived by keeping his heart as weathered as his saddle. Attachment was just another way to get killed in a land where nature and outlaws showed no mercy. The cattle ranch he'd built with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn determination had become his only companion, his only purpose. Yancey guided his Palomino down Whitehorn's main street, nodding curtly to familiar faces. The townsfolk respected him for his fair dealings and steady nerve, but few could claim to know the man behind the stoic expression. Just the way he preferred it. Trust was a luxury for people who'd never watched friends die of fever or bullet wounds in territories where doctors were as scarce as rain in August. He dismounted outside the general store, his tall frame unfolding gracefully despite the cold stiffening his joints. Christmas was approaching, and while he paid it little mind, his ranch hands deserved a decent meal and perhaps something to lift their spirits after months of grueling work. He had come to town for supplies, nothing more. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. The familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods enveloped him. Mrs. Holloway, the shopkeeper's wife, smiled warmly from behind the counter. "Mr. Pratt, good to see you, stocking up before the next storm." He nodded, removing his hat. "Just the necessities, ma'am." The store was unusually crowded for a Thursday, townspeople gathering supplies before the weather worsened. As Yancey moved toward the back shelves, the crowd parted, revealing a young woman he'd never seen before. She stood examining a bolt of blue fabric, her delicate fingers tracing the pattern thoughtfully. Her chestnut hair was pulled back neatly, though a few rebellious tendrils had escaped to frame a face that struck him with unexpected force. Not merely beautiful, though she certainly was, but alive with a quiet determination that seemed at odds with her fine-boned features. She wore a simple dark green dress, practical for the frontier but tailored well enough to suggest Eastern origins. When she glanced up and caught his gaze, Yancey quickly looked away, focusing intently on a shelf of canned goods as though they contained the secrets of the universe. He had no business staring at pretty girls, especially ones who carried themselves with such refinement. Women like that weren't meant for rough men who lived by the uncertain rhythm of frontier life. "You must be Mr. Pratt," a voice said beside him, clear as a mountain spring. He turned, finding himself looking into eyes the color of summer sage. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 20, with a sprinkling of freckles across the bridge of her nose that softened her otherwise serious expression. "Ma'am," he acknowledged, uncertain how she knew his name. "Katherine Foster," she said, extending her hand with surprising directness. "I'm the new schoolteacher. Mrs. Holloway pointed you out just now, said you have the finest cattle ranch in 3 counties. Yancey took her hand briefly, acutely aware of the roughness of his palm against her smoother skin. "Mrs. Holloway exaggerates. It's just land with some cows and a few good men to work it." "And modest too," Katherine said, a smile playing at her lips. "The town council mentioned your name when I arrived last week. They say you donate beef for school lunches even when prices are high." He shifted uncomfortably. "Children need to eat to learn." "Indeed they do," something in her expression softened. "I'm organizing a Christmas gathering for the schoolchildren. Many have so little, especially those from the outlying homesteads. I was hoping." The door banged open, cutting her off as a blast of cold air swept through the store. 3 men entered, their expressions hard beneath snow-dusted hats. Yancey recognized them immediately, hired guns working for Victor Caldwell, the cattle baron who'd been pressuring smaller ranchers to sell out for the past year. The lead man, Rusty Greaves, spotted Yancey and smirked. "Well now, if it ain't the stubborn Mr. Pratt, boss was wondering when you'd come to your senses about that offer." Yancey turned fully, positioning himself slightly in front of Katherine without conscious thought. "My answer hasn't changed, Greaves." "Might want to reconsider before winter really sets in," Greaves said, his hand resting too casually near his holster. "Accidents happen in the cold, fires, stampedes, all manner of unfortunate events." Mrs. Holloway clutched her shawl tighter. The store had gone silent, tension thick as molasses. "That sounds remarkably like a threat," Katherine said suddenly, stepping forward despite Yancey's protective stance. Perhaps Sheriff Miller would be interested in hearing it repeated. Greaves looked at her with surprise that quickly turned to amusement. Well now, what have we here? New blood in Whitehorn and with spirit too. Miss Foster is our new schoolteacher, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice quavering slightly, and she's right, that kind of talk isn't welcome here. Yancey maintained his calm facade, though every muscle was coiled tight. Your boss knows where to find me if he wants to talk business. Now I believe you men were just leaving. For a long moment Greaves held Yancey's stare, the challenge hanging in the air between them. Then he chuckled, touching the brim of his hat with mock politeness. Sure thing, Pratt, but remember what I said about accidents. Terrible things, accidents. The three men backed out, letting another blast of cold air sweep through the store before the door closed behind them. The tension in the room broke like ice on a spring river. Several people exhaled audibly. Mrs. Holloway bustled around the counter, fanning herself despite the chill. I apologize for that unpleasantness, Miss Foster, she said. Those men have been causing trouble since Mr. Caldwell hired them last spring. Katherine turned to Yancey, her expression concerned. Are they truly dangerous, Mr. Pratt? Most men who make threats are all talk, he answered, though he didn't entirely believe it. Caldwell was growing desperate as more ranchers refused his offers, but it's best to be cautious. Well, Katherine said, straightening her shoulders, they certainly won't intimidate me out of organizing our Christmas gathering. She looked at him directly. As I was saying, I hoped you might contribute some beef for the celebration, and perhaps, she hesitated, perhaps you'd consider attending yourself. The children would benefit from meeting successful ranchers. Shows them what's possible with hard work. Yancey found himself at a loss for words. He hadn't attended a Christmas celebration since leaving Boston 7 years ago. The holiday only reminded him of what he'd left behind and what the frontier had taken since. I'll send over whatever meat you need, he said finally, but I don't think. He'd be delighted to attend, Mrs. Holloway interjected, giving Yancey a look that brooked no argument. This town needs more community spirit, especially with troublemakers like those about. Don't you agree, Mr. Pratt? Trapped between the two women's expectant gazes, Yancey found himself nodding reluctantly. I suppose I could make an appearance. The smile that bloomed across Katherine's face was like sunrise after a long night. Wonderful. The celebration is on Christmas Eve at the schoolhouse. We're decorating it specially for the occasion. Later, as Yancey rode home with his supplies, snow beginning to fall in gentle swirls, he couldn't shake the image of Katherine Foster's determined expression, or the unexpected warmth her smile had kindled somewhere behind his carefully constructed walls. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of ranch work and increasingly severe weather. A blizzard swept through, keeping Yancey and his men confined to the ranch for 3 days, checking on cattle and repairing damage to outlying structures. When the skies finally cleared, he rode into town for mail and discovered an envelope addressed to him in neat, precise handwriting. Inside was a simple note, Mr. Pratt, the children are practicing a Christmas pageant to perform at our gathering. Several mentioned you've never attended our school events despite your generous contributions. Jonah Miller, age 8, specifically asked if the tall cowboy with the golden horse would come see him play a wise man. I told him I would personally ensure your attendance, counting on your word as a gentleman. K. Foster. Yancey found himself smiling despite himself. The schoolteacher had nerve, he'd give her that. 2 days later, necessity brought Katherine Foster to his doorstep. Heavy snow had damaged the schoolhouse roof, and without immediate repairs, the Christmas celebration would be impossible. The town council had directed her to Yancey, whose ranch boasted the only lumber supply this side of the mountains. His foreman, Hank, showed her into the ranch house parlor where Yancey was reviewing accounts. He stood quickly when she entered, struck again by the quiet dignity she carried like a mantle around her shoulders. Miss Foster, is everything all right? She explained the situation, snow melting from her cloak onto his wooden floor. The children have worked so hard on their pageant, to cancel now would break their hearts. Of course I'll provide the lumber, he said without hesitation, and my men can handle the repairs. We'll ride to town tomorrow, weather permitting. Relief softened her features. Thank you, the council said you would help, but she hesitated. You weren't certain, he finished for her. I've found that in my experience, men who avoid Christmas celebrations often avoid other social responsibilities as well, she said frankly. Yancey raised an eyebrow. Is that so? And what other observations have you made about me, Miss Foster? A flush colored her cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. That you're respected but not known, that you give generously but keep your distance. That something keeps you apart from the very community that holds you in high regard. Her perception unsettled him. The frontier demands focus, Miss Foster. Sentimentality is a luxury that gets people killed. Is that what community is to you? Sentimentality, the challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Before he could answer, Hank appeared at the door. Miss Foster, the snow's picking up something fierce. You shouldn't try riding back to town tonight. Alarm flashed across Catherine's face. I must return. I have lessons to prepare and Mrs. Holloway is expecting me for supper. Yancey moved to the window. The snow was indeed falling heavily, visibility already poor. Hank's right, it's too dangerous. You'll stay here tonight. Mr. Pratt, I hardly think. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, has a room prepared for unexpected guests, he said firmly. I'll send word to Mrs. Holloway that you're safe. We can head to town at first light to begin the schoolhouse repairs. Katherine looked ready to argue but glanced out the window again and reluctantly nodded. Very well. Thank you for your hospitality. That evening proved unexpectedly revealing. Over a simple but hearty dinner prepared by Mrs. Winters, Katherine spoke of her journey from Philadelphia to Montana Territory. My father was a teacher, she explained. When he died last winter, I found myself with his passion for education but little means to sustain myself. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Whitehorn, it seemed providential. The frontier is a harsh place for a woman alone, Yancey said, thinking of the threats and dangers she might face. Something flashed in her eyes. The East has its own harshness, Mr. Pratt, merely disguised with prettier manners. At least here, the dangers are honest ones. Her words struck a chord. Is that why you challenged Greaves so directly in the store, because you prefer honest dangers? She considered this as she sipped her tea. I challenged him because bullies rely on fear and silence. My father taught me that education isn't just about books, it's about standing firm in what's right. She paused. Why do you resist Caldwell's offers? Surely he's made it worth your while financially. This land isn't just property to me, Yancey found himself explaining. When I came west, I had nothing but determination and the skills my father taught me. Every fence post, every head of cattle represents years of work, of learning the rhythms of this place. Some things shouldn't have a price tag. Yet you isolate yourself from the very community you're defending, she observed quietly. The conversation shifted when Mrs. Winters brought in apple pie, but Catherine's words lingered in Yancey's mind long after she had retired to the guest room. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. True to his word, Yancey gathered his best men and the necessary lumber, escorting Katherine back to town. The schoolhouse damage was substantial but not irreparable. Under his direction, the men set to work replacing broken beams and damaged roofing. As they worked, Yancey noticed Katherine inside the schoolhouse, directing a group of children in what must be their pageant rehearsal. Curiosity drew him to the doorway during a break. Inside, children of various ages moved about the small stage, practicing their lines with serious concentration. A small boy, Jonah Miller, he presumed, spotted him and ran over excitedly. Mr. Pratt. Miss Foster said you'd come see our play. I'm the wise man with the gold, see my crown. He pointed proudly to a paper creation on his head. Very impressive, Yancey said, finding himself smiling genuinely. You'll make a fine wise man. Katherine approached, her eyes warm with approval. The children have been working very hard. We're also decorating for the celebration. She gestured to a pile of pine boughs and ribbons. The older boys are collecting more greenery this afternoon. Including mistletoe, piped up a girl of about 12 with braided blonde hair. Billy Jenkins knows where it grows on the old oak by the creek. Mistletoe is an important tradition, Katherine explained, though a slight blush touched her cheeks. It represents peace and goodwill. And kissing, giggled the blonde girl, earning herself a gentle reprimand from Katherine. As Yancey returned to the roof repairs, he found himself wondering about the schoolteacher's blush. The thought of Katherine Foster under the mistletoe stirred something he'd long kept dormant, a yearning for connection that contradicted everything he believed about survival on the frontier. Over the next several days, Yancey found reasons to visit town. The schoolhouse needed additional repairs. The lumber required checking. The children might appreciate seeing how a proper knot was tied for the decorations. Each time, Katherine greeted him with increasing warmth. their conversations growing easier, deeper. He learned she played the piano beautifully, having been taught by her mother before her passing. She discovered his hidden talent for wood carving when he absently shaped a small horse from a scrap piece of lumber while supervising the repairs. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Pratt," she said, examining the carving with admiration. "Yancey," he corrected her impulsively, "if we're to be friends, you might as well use my given name." Her smile was worth the momentary vulnerability. "Katherine, then." The Christmas Eve celebration approached rapidly. With the schoolhouse repaired and beautifully decorated with pine boughs, ribbons, and paper stars crafted by the children, excitement filled the town. Even with the growing tension from Caldwell and his men, who had taken to watching Yancey's comings and goings with unconcealed hostility, he found himself looking forward to the event. The morning before Christmas Eve, Yancey was loading supplies at the general store when Sheriff Miller approached, his expression grave. Pratt got a moment. They stepped aside, the sheriff lowering his voice. "Caldwell's men have been drinking heavily at the saloon, making threats, talking about teaching you and that uppity schoolteacher a lesson." Concern shot through Yancey like ice water. "Have they mentioned the school celebration?" "Not specifically, but I'd be careful. I've deputized extra men for tomorrow night, but wanted to warn you." Yancey thanked him, his mind already calculating. He should warn Katherine, perhaps suggest canceling the celebration for safety. The thought of those men anywhere near her or the schoolchildren made his blood run cold. He found her at the schoolhouse, arranging small gifts for each student, books, sweets, and hand-knitted scarves she'd apparently made herself. "You've been busy," he observed from the doorway. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" Yancey explained the sheriff's warning, watching her face carefully. "Perhaps we should postpone the celebration until Caldwell's men leave town." Katherine's expression hardened with a determination that surprised him. "Absolutely not. These children have little enough joy in their lives. I won't have bullies taking Christmas from them." "Katherine, this isn't about pride. These men are dangerous." "And cowering is exactly what they want," she countered. "The entire town will be here tomorrow night. Sheriff Miller and his deputies will be present. We will not hide in fear." Her courage both frustrated and impressed him. "At least let me bring some of my ranch hands." "Extra protection." She softened slightly. "That would be welcome, thank you." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Yancey, you will still come tomorrow, won't you, for the children?" Something in her voice made him wonder if it was only for the children's sake she asked. "I gave my word, didn't I?" The next evening, Christmas Eve arrived with unexpected beauty. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and peaceful under a canopy of stars. Yancey dressed with unusual care in his best shirt and vest, even trimming his light stubble to near smoothness. 6 of his most trusted hands accompanied him to town, all armed but instructed to keep their weapons concealed unless absolutely necessary. The schoolhouse glowed with lamplight, transformed by the decorations and the excited faces of children and parents gathering inside. A small pine tree stood in the corner, adorned with paper ornaments and strings of cranberries. The atmosphere was festive despite the undercurrent of tension among the adults, who'd all heard rumors of Caldwell's threats. Sheriff Miller nodded to Yancey from his position near the door. No sign of trouble so far. "Maybe they thought better of it." "Let's hope," Yancey replied, though experience had taught him that hope made a poor shield against bullets. When Katherine entered from the small back room, conversation momentarily ceased. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her chestnut hair, which she'd arranged in an elegant style with a few curls framing her face. She looked both dignified and approachable, every inch the respected teacher, yet something more that Yancey couldn't quite define. Their eyes met across the room, and she smiled with such genuine pleasure at his presence that something shifted in his chest, like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. The children's pageant began, filling the schoolhouse with innocent voices recounting the Christmas story. Jonah Miller performed his role as wise man with earnest dedication, beaming when he caught Yancey's eye during his big moment. Parents watched with teary pride, momentarily forgetting the harsh realities of frontier life. When the performance concluded to enthusiastic applause, Katherine moved to the front of the room. "Before we share refreshments and gifts, I want to thank everyone who made tonight possible, especially Mr. Pratt, whose generosity saved our celebration when our roof nearly collapsed." She gestured toward Yancey. who uncomfortably acknowledged the appreciative murmurs with a nod. Now, Catherine continued, the children have prepared one more surprise. At her signal, the older students began a Christmas carol, their voices blending in simple harmony that nevertheless filled the small schoolhouse with unexpected beauty. Yancey found himself transported to memories of childhood Christmases back east, memories he'd locked away as surely as he'd locked away his capacity for attachment. As the evening progressed, Yancey remained vigilant but gradually relaxed as no threat materialized. Catherine moved through the crowd with natural grace, ensuring every child received personal attention and that shy parents felt welcomed. Watching her, he realized she possessed a rare gift for creating community, for making people feel they belonged together despite their differences. Near the end of the celebration, he found himself standing alone by the refreshment table when she approached. "You haven't tried the apple cider," she observed. "Mrs. Jenkins spent days preparing it." "I've been keeping watch," he explained. Seems Caldwell's men decided to stay away after all. Relief softened her features. "Thank goodness, I was more worried than I let on." "I noticed," he said with a small smile. "You have a terrible poker face, Katherine Foster." She laughed, the sound warming him more effectively than any cider could have. "A failing my father often noted. He said my eyes betrayed every thought." "They do," Yancey agreed, then added more softly, "It's not a failing." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when young Jonah Miller rushed up, still wearing his wise man crown. Miss Foster, Billy forgot to hang the mistletoe. He brought it but didn't hang it up." Catherine's cheeks colored slightly. "That's all right, Jonah. The celebration has been perfect without it." "But you said it was tradition," the boy protested, holding up a sprig of the green plant with its distinctive white berries. "My ma says traditions are important." Yancey, seeing Catherine's embarrassment and the boy's disappointment, made an impulsive decision. "Your teacher is right about traditions, Jonah. Let me help you." He took the mistletoe and, finding a nail already in one of the door frames, secured it properly. When he turned back, he found Catherine watching him with an expression that made his heart beat faster. "There," he said, suddenly feeling awkward under her gaze. "Tradition preserved." Catherine stood motionless, looking from the mistletoe to Yancey with those expressive eyes that indeed hid nothing, including a warmth that both invited and frightened him with its intensity. Aware of the attention they were attracting, Yancey glanced away, unable to confront the possibilities hanging between them as surely as the mistletoe above. She blushed deeply, understanding his retreat for what it was, not rejection but fear. The moment was interrupted by the schoolhouse door banging open. Rusty Greaves stood there with two companions, all visibly intoxicated and wearing expressions that promised trouble. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Greaves slurred, his gaze finding Yancey immediately. "The whole town celebrating while honest men get shafted out of what's rightfully theirs." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, hand on his holstered gun. "You men need to leave. This is a children's celebration." "We got a right to be here," one of the other men argued belligerently. "This here's a public building." Catherine moved to gather the frightened children, her voice calm despite the tension. "Parents, please take your children to the back room. Mrs. Jenkins will continue our celebration there while this misunderstanding is resolved." Yancey admired her composure as she efficiently cleared the main room of children, leaving only adults to face the intruders. His ranch hands had positioned themselves strategically, ready for whatever came next. "There's no misunderstanding," Greaves said, focusing on Yancey again. "Your time's run out, Pratt. Boss says you sign over your water rights by New Year's, or we burn you out." "That's enough," Sheriff Miller barked. "One more threat and you're spending Christmas in my jail." Greaves smirked, swaying slightly, "Just delivering a message, and one for the schoolmarm too." His gaze shifted to Catherine, who had returned to stand resolutely beside Yancey. "Pretty thing like you should be careful who she associates with. Accidents don't just happen to ranchers." Something in Yancey snapped. He moved with the speed that had kept him alive on the frontier, crossing the room in 3 strides to grab Greaves by the collar and slam him against the door frame. "You threaten her again," he said in a voice cold as the Montana winter, "and they'll never find all the pieces." "Yancey," Catherine said softly behind him, "not like this, not on Christmas Eve." Her voice penetrated his fury. He released Greaves, stepping back with effort. Sheriff Miller and his deputies quickly moved in, disarming the 3 men. "You've earned yourselves a night in jail to sober up," the sheriff announced. And come morning, you can ride back to Caldwell and tell him any more threats will be met with prosecution." As they were led away, Catherine touched Yancey's arm gently. "Are you all right?" He was still trembling with suppressed rage. "He threatened you because of me." "No," she said firmly, "because he's a bully who uses fear as a weapon. My association with you was merely convenient ammunition." The remaining adults gradually dispersed to collect their children, the festive mood dampened but not destroyed. Catherine insisted on finishing the celebration properly, distributing the remaining gifts with determined cheer. When the last family had departed with thanks and Christmas wishes, Yancey remained behind to help her clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, the tension of the confrontation gradually dissipating. "I should apologize," he said finally. "I nearly ruined your celebration with violence." Catherine paused in her gathering of pine needles. "You were protecting me. But you should know I've been taking care of myself for quite some time." "I don't doubt it," he said, watching her methodical movements. "But out here, nobody survives alone." "That's what I've been getting wrong." She looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "What do you mean?" Yancey moved closer, choosing his words carefully. "I came west believing that attachment was weakness. That to survive the frontier, a man had to rely only on himself, keep everyone at a distance. And now," she asked quietly, "now I'm wondering if I've been wrong all along. If real strength comes from having something, someone worth fighting for." Catherine's eyes softened. "My father used to say that the truest measure of civilization isn't buildings or laws, but how people care for one another. Perhaps the frontier needs that more than anywhere." Yancey nodded, then glanced up at the mistletoe still hanging in the doorway. "About earlier, when I hung that and then looked away." A blush rose in her cheeks again. "You don't need to explain." "I think I do," he said, taking a step closer. "I looked away not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to too much, and that terrified me." Her breath caught audibly. "And now?" "Now I'm tired of letting fear decide my path," he said simply. They stood beneath the mistletoe, the schoolhouse quiet except for the crackling of the dying fire. Yancey gently took Catherine's hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit within his own. "Miss Foster," he said softly, "may I have permission to uphold tradition?" Her smile was answer enough, but she whispered yes, just before he lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, but filled with a promise that neither of them had dared voice until now. When they parted, Catherine's eyes remained closed for a heartbeat longer, as though memorizing the moment. When she opened them, the emotion reflected their matched what Yancey felt expanding in his own chest, a feeling he'd denied himself for too long. "Merry Christmas, Yancey," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Catherine." The months that followed brought both challenges and unexpected joys. Caldwell's threats escalated into action when Yancey's northern fence line was cut and a small section of grazing land deliberately burned. But where he once would have faced these troubles alone, Yancey now found himself supported by the community Catherine had helped him connect with. Neighboring ranchers joined forces to patrol boundaries. The town council publicly condemned Caldwell's tactics, and Catherine, with her unwavering belief in standing against bullies, organized the schoolchildren to write letters to the territorial governor detailing the intimidation their families faced. By spring, Caldwell's campaign had drawn unwelcome attention from territorial authorities. Facing potential prosecution and the loss of political allies, the cattle baron finally retreated, selling his holdings to a consortium of smaller ranchers, including Yancey, who purchased the water-rich section that adjoined his property. Throughout it all, Yancey and Catherine's relationship deepened through shared challenges and quiet evenings of conversation. She continued teaching, bringing new ideas and enthusiasm to the schoolhouse. He expanded his ranch operations, implementing breeding techniques he'd learned back east to improve his stock. They were sitting on the porch of his ranch house one evening in late May, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, when Yancey finally found the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Catherine," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "you know I'm not one for flowery speeches." She smiled, the last rays of sunlight catching in her chestnut hair. "I've noticed. When I came west, I believed the frontier was no place for love. That attachment was a weakness that would get a man killed." He took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You've shown me I was wrong. Love isn't weakness out here. It's the only thing that makes the hardship worthwhile." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate wildflower patterns that had taken him weeks of evening work to complete. Catherine's eyes widened as she recognized his handiwork. When he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small sapphire, tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to stop teaching," he hurried to add. "The schoolhouse is only a short ride from here, and the ranch house has plenty of room for books and whatever else you need. I want to build something with you, Catherine. Something that lasts." "Yancey Pratt," she said, voice trembling slightly, "are you proposing marriage?" Inelegantly, but yes. His own voice was rough with emotion. "Will you have me, Catherine? Will you make a home with me here where the land is harsh but beautiful, like the love we've found?" Her answer came not in words at first, but in the way she launched herself into his arms, nearly toppling them both from the porch swing. When she pulled back, her face was radiant with joy. "Yes," she said simply, "yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in the schoolhouse, transformed once more with wildflowers and ribbons. The entire town attended, along with ranchers from miles around. Jonah Miller, now 9, proudly served as ring-bearer, his wise man's confidence having grown into everyday courage under Catherine's tutelage. After the ceremony, as guests celebrated with food and music, Yancey pulled his bride into a quiet corner. "There's something I want to show you," he said, leading her outside where his wagon waited, freshly painted and hitched to his best team. He helped her climb up to the seat and took the reins, driving away from the celebration toward their ranch. But instead of taking the main road, he turned onto a smaller trail that wound up into the foothills. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked, curious. "You'll see." After 20 minutes, they crested a small rise, and Yancey drew the horses to a halt. Below them stretched a view that encompassed both the town of Whitehorn and his ranch, with mountains rising majestically beyond. "It's breathtaking," Catherine said softly. "I found this spot my first year here," Yancey explained. "When things got difficult, I'd ride up and remind myself what I was working for." He paused, taking her hand. "But I never imagined I'd be sharing it with someone, especially not someone who'd change everything I thought I knew about strength and survival." From beneath the wagon seat, he produced a small pine sapling in a burlap-wrapped pot. "What's this?" Catherine asked as he handed it to her. "A tradition I'd like to start," he explained. "On our anniversary each year, we'll come here and plant a tree, watch them grow as our life together grows." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she cradled the small tree. "It's perfect." Together they dug a hole and planted the sapling, patting the earth firmly around its roots. When they finished, Yancey pulled Catherine close, kissing her with all the love and promise he once thought too dangerous to feel. "You know," he said when they parted, "I think I've been wrong about something else too." "What's that?" she asked, resting her head against his chest. "I always thought mistletoe was just for Christmas," he murmured against her hair. "But I'm thinking we should hang it year-round." Catherine laughed, the sound carrying across the Montana landscape like a promise. "Mr. Pratt, I do believe frontier life has made you quite scandalous." "Only where you're concerned, Mrs. Pratt," he replied, kissing her again as the setting sun bathed them in golden light. "Only where you're concerned." And as they stood together, silhouetted against the vast Montana sky, Yancey knew with absolute certainty that the true wealth of the frontier wasn't in land or cattle or gold, but in finding someone with whom to share its beauty and weather its hardships. Someone who made you brave enough to hang mistletoe and face your deepest fears. Someone who taught you that even in the wildest places, love could take root and flourish, as steady and enduring as the mountains themselves.